Hello, Sid here, and welcome to the Drunken Ork. This is the second of my Killa Kan build videos. The first one was a rocket dread, which had a Piat type launcher and a little grot spotter sticking out the top of the can. This one is going to be a shooty can, so he's going to have a big shooter, or big shooters. I tend not to stick with one if I can help it these days. So yeah, after I've done this one, I'll be going on to the third video. Yeah, that's quite a switch up, isn't it? So that'll be coming in the not too distant future. But for now, let's crack on with Killa Kan 2 and let's look at the build. Well, this is the body I want to use for the Killa Kan. I like the little chimney on top there. Gives an extra exhaust. But for legs, I want to use this, which is a Death Dread leg. Now, it's a nice big leg, really. It would work pretty well, I think, if I had two of them. But I don't. I made a Death Dread with 3 legs, and I had 1 leg left over. So I'm going to mark in the centre here and make this a one-legged Killa Kan. An intentionally one-legged Killa Kan. He hasn't suffered some sort of horrific battlefield injury. I want to see him hopping about the place on 1 leg. And it's a bigger leg than standard, so I think that's alright. There's lots of pistons and that on it. So just mark out roughly where I need to cut away, and then I'll get the cutting. Now, obviously with something like this where you're not cutting from an edge, it's a bit trickier. And I tried a few different methods here. I started with the razor saw, but really, if I'm being honest, all that did was mark out where I wanted to cut. It was a little bit too awkward, especially since I couldn't really hold the model. I just had to hold it in my hand and essentially work the model up and down the blade of the saw as opposed to moving the saw as normal. So the mixture of a cutting disc on a rotary tool and a nice sharp drill bit with that sideways cutting action, and then cleaning up with, you know, knives and grinders and what have you, I was able to cut that section away. And it's best to cut a bit away, try and fit the leg. If it doesn't fit, cut a bit more away, cut a bit more away, test it, cut a bit more away, test it, and so on, as opposed to just howking away a great big yarking hole, which leaves you loads of filling work to do. But once I'd got it in, I realised that the leg itself was just a little bit too big for where I wanted it, so I had to trim a little bit off the back of the leg as well. Just a bit that was going to be fitting inside the can, just so it would fit more snugly. I also wanted the foot on the base to be on its sort of tiptoes, if you like, as if it's on the ball of the foot, if robot legs have balls, as if it's pushing off for another jump. So I wanted to have the leg angled quite far back. So once I was happy with the fit, just literally slap a load of plastic cement in the hole and pop the leg in place. Now with something like this, although you might not get a perfect fit, as in every single point is going to be glued, as long as there's enough points to hold the leg in place once it's fully dried, you're fine, because you can always fill the gaps, or even just, and I'm going to be putting more pieces on anyway, because it needs some sort of hinge. You can't just put the leg in and say that'll do it, and see where does it bend at the body. Well, that's where you need a hinge, and that's going to add extra structural stability too. So here you can see I've done a hinge on one side. This is just to show where the leg sort of bends at the body. So the other side hasn't got one. So I've got this little piece here, which is the mounting bit off a Death Dread jaw plate. So that's going to go there. So obviously there's a little bit of excess needs trimming off, but first I'm just going to tidy up the bit I'm going to glue it to. Just shave off any rivets which are in the way, and scrape off some of the bit that's already got a bit of glue on to get back down to virgin plastic. So you need to trim off these little rivets just to make cutting it easier. And I'm just eyeballing it and marking off the bits that need to be removed so it'll fit around the housing on the can itself. Once I'm happy with that, I'll just get a knife and just trim it away. I mean, some of it I'll use a knife, sometimes I'll use snips. Whatever tool's best for the job. Do a little test fit. If any more bits need to come off, they can come off. And once I'm happy with the fit, slap a bit of glue on, glue it into place. So there you go. Both the hinges in place now, And I've also glued the toe cap on. I trimmed it a little bit so I could have it lifted up, just to give that push off effect I mentioned earlier. So on the back, I didn't just want to use one of the engine blocks because they're quite useful anyway, so I like to keep a few of those spares, so I'm going to use this. Now this I think is an engine sort of hood cover off the Warbosses blaster jet. It seems to be exactly the right size, although there's plenty of gaps, but you know, we can fill those. So again, I'm just going to slap a load of glue on, just where it's going to adhere to, and hold that in place. Now like I say, it's not 100% bonded all the way around. It might only be 40%, 35%, 27% bonded, but that's going to be enough to hold it in place. I'm just sticking a bit more glue in as well, just to make sure that where it is touching, there is going to be enough glue. Or plastic cement. That will fully hold it in place, and then once it's dried, I'll be able to go around and fill some of the gaps as well. Now, shooters. So I've got these. I believe these are off the Admech Archaeopter. Heavy stubbers. Not good enough for big shots for me. And I've got a couple of ammo belts here, I believe off the Warbosses. And there's a little feed beneath the shooter here, which doesn't quite fit the ammo feed, but I can trim that down and pop it in. So that's what I'm going to do now. There's a block on the end of the ammo belt, which is basically the mounting point, and it's a little bit too large, so I'm just cutting off the front and the side of it, just so it's small enough to fit into the little recess. Glue them in place. I always found it handy to have a little blob of blue tack knocking about, so I can stick the little small parts like this to it while they're dry. And for example, this one I stick on with the ammo belt pointing up, because there's enough bond already in the cement to keep the ammo belt up, but if I lay it on its side, it might get a bit of sag, and nobody likes that, do they? So while they're drying, I'm going to move on to filling some of the gaps. Now this pot here I've got is sprue goo or sprue glue, and what I do is when I've got a poly cement bottle, I always buy it in the glass bottles, because, well, for this reason really. I find the tubes with the needles a bit hit and miss. You can very precisely drown an area, whereas with the stuff with the brush you can be quite precise. And then when it gets to the point where you've run out of glue, you know, you've got that a little bit in the bottom, not enough for the brush to actually reach it. What I do is I snip a few bits of sprue, just down to about 5-6 mil. You know, you don't have to be, I mean, you could probably go bigger if you wanted, but you know, it does it a bit quicker if you use smaller pieces. And I just pop those in the pot, and they just dissolve, and the glue turns into a gloopy plastic thing, basically liquid plastic. And when you expose it to air, the poly cement part will evaporate, leaving behind plastic. Now you can paint it in with a brush, but as much as I said the brush was accurate, with this stuff, not so much. It's quite thick. It's like painting with treacle, if you can imagine it. It strings about the place, and you know. So what I tend to do if I need to be precise is use one of these silicone sculpting tools and basically just paint a bit of the stuff on the end of the tool, and then you can actually apply it exactly where you want, literally scraping it in to the gaps. So I'll just go around the outsides of the engine shell a little bit at a time and just fill them gaps in. And of course, once this is dried, and it can take a while to dry, we're not talking, you know, it'll be fully, you know, you can do anything with it within half an hour. You know, I tend to leave it for a good hour, if not more, if I can. But once it has dried, it's just like plastic. You can file it, you can cut it, you can do what you want to it. You can add more to it, smooth it. I was going to say leave it quite bumpy like a well, but it generally does go quite smooth in itself, because it's still liquid, so it flows flat, depending on how thick you've got it. I've seen this Top Me Sprue Goo sort of pot up a few times, especially with the extra thin from Tamiya, because I don't personally find that much use. I prefer the standard to the extra thin. I know a lot of people swear by the extra thin. It's, you know, it's got its uses, but it's not the go-to for me. But I do use it if I've noticed I've put too much sprue in my little goo pot and it becomes a bit thick, then I can just add a splash or two of that. A little bit of time, give it a mix with a stick, until you get the right consistency. And then after a while you get to go back to the stick and it's got a big blob of solid plastic on the end, and you can cut that off with a knife. And I don't know about you, but I just find that sort of shit very satisfying. Anybody who's kit bashing and converting should have a pot of sprue goo. Don't throw your old glues out, get some sprues. You're going to have both of those things and that's all you need, and it's invaluable. Especially useful for things like shoulder pads on cans and dreads, because the adhesion point is pretty small, but if you're gluing it straight to the hull, even though you're only going to get minimal contact, once it's held in place, although not very securely, you can go in with a sprue goo and just out of sight slap it in, and it'll form a much stronger bond. So here we're going back to the Archaeopter sprue, and these little bits, I don't know what they are. I think they've got to be some sort of mount for guns, so that's what I'm using them as. There we go. So since this has only got one leg, it's got 2 leg mounting points which are going begging. So I'm going to clean up these pieces, and then I'm going to cut the domes off the legs of or where the legs would go on the Killa Kan. I'll do that with a rotary disc. See how skilled I am? Not even cutting me fingers off, despite the fact that it looks like I'm coming very close. It's sometimes easier to hold a model on the work surface as well, just to get a bit more stability. However, I am man, hear me roar, and I can hold tiny bits of plastic quite steady. Clean it up with a knife and stick them on. And because these bits have got a little dome on and the shooters have got a little recess, the recess fits onto the dome quite nicely, so I can rotate them at whatever angle I want. Because the can's going to be leaning forward in that mid sort of jump, I'm going to angle the guns up so they're level with the ground. Don't forget to drill your barrels. Now I use the rotary tool drill bit for this because I'm lazy. A lot of people use a pin vise. A lot of people don't do it. Nothing wrong with the former, everything wrong with the latter in my opinion. The thing we're using this with a decent drill bit as well is there's absolutely no pressure needed. It just chews into the plastic. Don't have it on too high a speed. It is possible to melt the plastic doing it like this. And if you do happen to go slightly off centre, which if you put a little sort of guide hole in the end just with a twist of a craft knife, you shouldn't, but if you do, with this sort of like tool you can just drag it slightly and recorrect that. And you don't have to go all the way down the barrel. That's the first mistake I made. I tried drilling an Ork shooter barrel out by going all the way down the barrel. Absolute disaster. You just need to go, as you can see here, a mil or 2 deep. Your shade paint's going to get in there. It'll look like a recessed gun barrel. You see here there's a couple of large gaps at the top of the engine shell, so instead of using a sprue goo for this, because I want it nice and flat, I'm just going to use a couple of bits of plastic card. So I've cut 2 tiny bits of plastic card to roughly the right shape, roughed up the edges a bit, and I'm just going to glue those into place there. Once they're on, I'll get me Meng rivets out again, and I'll just clag a few rivets on, just to show how it's fastened in place. Right, exhausts. Now, these are exhausts off the Wasbomb Blaster kit, and I'm going to cut these up a little bit, because you've got the 3 mounting points there, which go perfectly on the side of that engine. I mean, it's actually meant to go there, there's the little recess bits. So I'm going to put them there, but I want it slightly different. So I'm going to make a cut here, just to take this bit off. So I'm cutting the section off which joins up the longest and middle pipe. Give them a clean up with a knife. And because exhausts on Killa Kans are notorious for being, well, best word I suppose is temporary. You put them on, you take them somewhere, it's gotten on. They've all snapped off. The GW has little sort of pegs and recesses to help with that, but it's still not the best. So what I'm going to do is, because I'm basically adding new exhausts onto this, because those pipes on the side are going to have exhaust toppers if you like, I'm going to pin all these. So just like drilling your barrels, I'm going to drill a little hole into the exhausts and at the exhaust ends, and then pop those in place. You want to cut the 2 surfaces flat first to make sure that they're going to get a good bond with the cement. Then when you put the pin in, that'll just hold them in place, and any sharp or sudden knocks they might get during transport or even the game or anything at all, the pin will add that extra bit of sort of, you know, spine of strength to it. Now if I'm being totally honest, You probably don't need to glue the pins in place because the surfaces are going to be attached. The pin just adds the extra strength. But I tend to put a little drop of not even a drop, the hint of super glue on the end of each pin. Some people will say that is because I am a fanny and go at the far ends of a fart with everything I do. But I also like to think there's a little bit of cowboy in us, and some things are a bit more slapdash. But when it comes to exhausts, I'm pinning, baby. See my little finger out with the drill. The reason that's out is I use it as an anchor point to the other hand. It helps keep it steady so I can be more accurate. I'm sure that's just an instinctive thing that everybody does. Again, be careful not to drill all the way through the model into your fingers, because it hurts. Quite engrossed in this at this point, as you can see. I've sort of drifted away from the centre of the camera a few times, and for that I apologise. But you don't want to watch me drill. I also find putting the pins in place with pliers helps, because you can hold them with the pliers quite precisely on the tip of the pin, whereas my fingers would be covering most of the pin and therefore getting super glue on them. And with the pliers as well, you can grab a hold of the pin and make sure it's pushed all the way in. Exhaust with pin. Just putting these on a upturned base so I don't lose them in amongst all the detritus. I'm gluing these onto the bottom two holes of the engine hood because they go quite far back, but as the model is tipped forward they'll be more up. And then when I'm ready, glue them onto the exhausts. So you end up with something, well you end up not with something like that, you end up with that. Now of the bits I cut away from the original triple exhausts, I've got some bits left, so I need to put something on top. I need to make them look a little bit more exhausty, so I've got this, which I think is a melter weapon off some Imperial thing, but the tip there looks a little bit exhausty to me, so that's coming off. I could put the whole thing on, but it would just be a little bit too long. And the exhaust bits themselves have already got some nice detail on, like venting and little armour plate and what have you, so I just really want the tip. Sometimes just the tip is enough. I also took the tip off another Killa Kan exhaust. Then the gun goes in place. I just want to hold it to a base to see what level is, and I glue the second gun on as well. And the good thing about these ammo belts is they kind of they hang back a bit. You know, they don't hang straight down. They go back on a slight angle, so it looks like an ammo belt would if something is bounding along. It's all about the test fit, and of course you've got a bit of time as the glue dry, so you know, fiddle away till you're happy with it, and then don't touch it. Leave it alone. Let it dry. Also going to stick a jaw plate on this one. Very standard Killa Kan jaw plate. I'm going to go with the one with the big tusks. I want this fella to have shoulder pads, so I'm going to use a little square shoulder pads from the Killa Kan kit because I like them, because they're nice and chunky, and just glue them in place. A little bit of trimming with a knife just so they get a nicer fit, because I've put a few extra things on the back, and the shoulder pads were sort of encroaching on that a bit, so I'll just trim a little bit away, trying to make sure they still keep contact. And if I get any extra contact points for the glue to adhere to, more the better really. A little bit of blue tack on the desk means I can just stick him down as well without him falling over. He does not stand up on his own. As this fella's already got his shooters, he needs a can claw option, so I'm just using standard Killa Kan arms, one claw, one saw, glued them together and blue tacked them to the model. Now I've blue tacked them on just so I can paint it in sub-assembly and actually get to the model without the arms getting in the way. Nothing special there. I've saved you the ball ache of watching that. When I do them in sub-assembly, I'll put a little blob of blue tack over half the ball joint on the arm, and I'll put a little blob as well inside the can body. That's just so after they're primed and painted, I can pick the blue tack out, and then I've got plastic on plastic for gluing. That's it. Killa Kan 2 or 9, depending. Done. There you go then. That's the second can. He's a shooter and he's only got one leg. Oh, but it's a big beefy leg like that. I think he can hop around at a fair old lick. That's the idea anyway. So I'm going to get these painted up. I'm going to get the vid out for the third can first of all, and once I've got all three built, I'll get them painted, and I'll probably do a little video with all three fully finished, just to show you where they ended up. I don't normally show models when they're grey, you know what I mean, grey plastic. I like to get them painted normally, but in the interest of time, I'm just getting these out just to show you the build. Even the shots at the end aren't that much in depth. You know, it gives you a general idea, but there'll be better, maybe even rotate cam might come back into it once they're all painted up. But for now, I'll leave you with a couple of shots of the finished model. Well, finished built model anyway. And thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Leave a comment if you like. Always like to hear from you. And until next time, look after yourself. Bye bye.